My name's Dave Halpern. I'm 42 years old, and I've been running freight trains in Michigan for most of my life. I'm not a writer. I'm a railroad guy. I go to work. I move freight from one place to another. I come home tired, and that's about the size of it. I'm only here because I saw something on the job that I can't file away under normal, no matter how many times I go over it. I've tried calling it a big dog or some kind of deformed bear, and it just doesn't fit. The only word people seem to have for it is Dogman, and I know how that sounds. I used to roll my eyes at that stuff too. The stories of the Michigan Dogman, the Beast of Bray Road, and all that nonsense. I still might, if I hadn't watched it walk up to my train. This happened in the fall of 2023, on a night run, somewhere out in the middle of nowhere. I'm not going to get too specific about where, partly because I still work for the railroad and partly because I don't want idiots out there trespassing on the tracks, trying to see it for themselves. If you've ever been out on a lonely stretch of line in the dark, with nothing around you but swamp, trees, and the low rumble of a freight engine, you can picture the kind of place I'm talking about. Most nights are all the same. Signals, radios, mileposts, the feel of the locomotive under you, and the weight of the train behind you. You watch your speed, you watch your gauges, you listen for anything that doesn't sound right, and you let the miles roll under the wheels. If you're lucky, nothing happens at all. No hotboxes, no broken knuckles, no idiots on the crossings, just another uneventful trip. This wasn't one of those nights. I'm going to tell this the way it happened, as best as I remember it. No extra drama, no made-up details. I'm not asking you to believe in werewolves or monsters or anything like that. All I'm saying is that on that run, I got stopped in the dark on a remote stretch of track, and I found out there was something living down in one of those concrete culverts. And whatever it was, it walked on two legs. It looked like a wolf standing up, and it tried to get to me. That night started out like 100 others I've run. Night run, mixed freight, nothing special. I had a long train behind me and a decent weather forecast for once. No snow, no freezing rain, just a cool, clear fall night with a little wind. The kind of night where the air feels thin and the sound of the engine carries a long way. I signed on, did my checks, talked to the dispatcher, and rolled out like I always do. Signals were green, radios were quiet, and for the first couple of hours, there was nothing to think about except speed limits, grades, and the next control point. If you've never run a train at night, it's hard to explain how it feels. You're sitting in that cab with the gauges and screens glowing in front of you, and beyond the glass, there's just a tunnel of headlight on the tracks and a whole lot of black around you. You see the reflection off the rails, the occasional road crossing, maybe a farmhouse light way off in the distance. Everything else is a suggestion. You hear the low rumble of the prime mover, the whine of the traction motors, and the slight change in the sound of the rail when you go over a bridge or through a crossing. Once in a while, you catch a set of eyes off in the brush. Deer, coyotes, stray dogs. But usually it's just you, the locomotive, and the dark. I was making good time when the wayside signal at the next control point dropped to red. That happens. There was another train ahead of me occupying the block, and with positive train control in the cab, I didn't have a choice but to start setting the air and bring my train down slowly. So I eased off the throttle, set a nice, smooth reduction, and let the train settle to a stop like I've done 1,000 times before. No drama, no weird noises, just a long roll down, and then that heavy, solid feeling when all that tonnage finally comes to rest behind you. The signal ahead stayed red. The dispatcher told me to hold tight and wait for the train in front to clear. Routine. Once I was sitting there, it hit me how quiet it was outside the cab. The engine was idling, but out beyond that, there was nothing. No traffic noise, no yard sounds, no town glow on the horizon. Just black tree line and low, empty sky. I cracked the side window on my side to cool the cab off a little, and leaned out to get some fresh air. You do that sometimes when you're waiting. Just look around, listen, break up the monotony. That's when I noticed where I'd stopped. The headlight beam didn't show much except track disappearing into the dark, but when I looked back along the side of the locomotive, I could see the concrete mouth of a culvert maybe 20 feet behind the cab, just off the ballast, just a dark hole under the tracks with brush growing around it. Nothing special about it. I've passed 1,000 just like it. I don't know why I kept looking at it. Maybe it was the way the shadows sat around the opening, or maybe it was just that there was nothing else to look at. I was still halfway in that bored, half-asleep headspace when I saw something move down in that black patch. Just a shift, like something big turning over or crawling forward under the concrete. At first I figured it was a dog or maybe a coyote taking shelter in there. We see plenty of those along the right-of-way. But as I watched, whatever it was came closer to the edge and started to climb up out of the culvert. The shape of it didn't look right. It wasn't the way a dog comes out of a pipe, belly low and tail behind. This thing unfolded itself onto the rock, rising up like it had more height to work with than it should have, and the longer I watched it, the more obvious it was that the size was off. It was way too big for any dog I've ever seen, more in the range of a good-sized black bear, thick through the shoulders and back. But even then, the way it carried itself didn't match that either. By then, I wasn't bored anymore. For a few seconds, I just watched it in that little bit of spill from the headlight and cab lights, trying to make sense of what I was looking at. From where I was, it was mostly a moving shadow against a darker shadow. I could see bulk. I could see the way it shifted its weight on the rock, but not enough detail to calm myself down with a label. Finally, I reached over and flipped on the step lights and the walkway lights along my side of the locomotive. Those lights aren't anything special. They're just there so you can see where you're putting your feet when you climb up and down. But when they came on, that whole side of the engine lit up in a hard white wash, and some of it spilled down onto the ballast and the mouth of the culvert. That was when my stomach went cold. The thing I'd been watching was turned partway toward the tracks now, like it was listening to the engine or feeling the vibration under its feet. In that light, I could see it clearly. It had come all the way out of the culvert and was standing on the rock, maybe 10, 12 feet off the rail, about even with the rear of the locomotive cab. It was up on its back legs, not awkward the way a dog stands when you coax it for a treat, but like that was its normal way of being. The body was long and heavy through the chest, shoulders thick, waist pulled in. The fur was patchy in spots, longer along the shoulders and back, thinner down the sides, and the color was somewhere in that dark, gray-brown range that just about disappears in the woods. What really threw me was the proportions. The legs were bent like a dog's, hocks back behind it, but they had too much length in the thigh and too much muscle in the upper part. The feet looked more like big, ugly human feet that had started to turn into paws than anything you'd see on a normal animal. Up top, the arms hung too long, and what was at the ends of them was not paws at all. I could see hands, big hands, long fingers, claws catching the light when they uncurled. The head was the part that really scrambled my brain. At a glance, it read as wolf or big German shepherd. Long muzzle, heavy jaw, ears up on top. But the longer I looked at it, the less it fit in that box. The skull looked too broad through the temples, like something had widened it sideways, and there was a hint of a brow ridge over the eyes that you don't see on a normal dog. The muzzle wasn't quite right either. It was a little too short and too deep, like the jaw had been built to take more pressure than it should. When it shifted its expression, the muscles moved in a way that reminded me more of a person scowling than a dog snarling, with little creases in the face and around the eyes that didn't belong on an animal. There was nothing cute or rounded about it, nothing that made me think mask or costume. If anything, it looked like somebody had taken a big wolf head and forced it onto a frame that wasn't meant for it. When it turned a little more toward the lights, I caught its eyes. They didn't glow on their own. They just threw back a flat, glassy reflection from my lamps, the way a dog or coyote does when you hit them in the beam. That was somehow worse, because it made it feel real. It didn't act shocked to see the lights come on. It didn't rear back or bolt. It just squinted a little, blinked, and then angled its head like it was listening harder. Then it started to move toward the locomotive, not charging, not stalking low like it was about to pounce, just walking, placing those back feet carefully on the ballast, and letting the front ones hang a little loose in front, like a person that's not quite sure whether they're going to grab something or not. When it got closer to the side of the engine, It finally noticed me at the window. I saw the head tilt up just a touch, the ears flick, the nostrils flare. The eyes tracked up to where I was leaning out. For a second or two, we just looked at each other, and it didn't read like surprise. It read like recognition. That's when the layout of the locomotive hit me in a way it never does on a normal night. There's a side walkway with handrails running almost the entire length of the long engine, and the cab's rear side door opens right onto that platform. If it climbed the steps in the back and got onto the running board, it could be at my door in seconds. And in that moment, I realized something else that made my mouth go dry. The cab isn't a bunker. It's sheet metal, glass, and a lock meant to keep honest people honest. I'm used to feeling high up and separated from whatever's on the ground. But looking at that creature staring back at me, I suddenly pictured those hands on the rail, those fingers on the door handle, and the cab door bending or being ripped out if it decided to try to get to me. I'd been leaning out like I was watching a deer in the beam. I wasn't. I was a man in a lit box, and whatever was down there had a straight path to me and, more than likely, the strength required to get inside. That's when the little voice in the back of my head told me I had to do something. I pulled myself back inside the cab and started looking around for anything within arm's reach that might make it think twice about making a run at the cab. My hand landed on my flashlight. It's just a high-powered tactical light I keep up there for inspections, about the size of a baton, that throws a tight, nasty beam when you crank it up. I grabbed it without taking my eyes off the side window, thumbed it on, and shoved the lens right up to the glass. When I turned it on at full power and dragged the beam down over the culvert, it nailed the thing right in the face. Up until then, I'd only had the step lights and spillover from the cab and headlight. This was different. The beam punched through all the softer light and lit its eyes and muzzle like I'd shoved a flare in its teeth. The creature didn't like that one bit. The reaction was instant. It flinched back a half step, head snapping to the side, one arm coming up to block the light. I saw the claws curl in toward the palm, like a person making a fist against something bright. It let out this low, rough sound, not a full growl, more like the start of one, and turned its head away from the beam, but it didn't break off. It shifted its weight, moved sideways along the ballast, trying to angle itself so the worst of the light slid off its face. Every time I tracked it with the beam and caught its eyes, it'd twitch and squint and throw that arm up again, but it kept inching closer to the side of the engine all the same. That was the moment when it really sank in that it wasn't just curious from a distance. It was working on a plan to get to me, light or no light. The flashlight wasn't going to stop it. All it was doing was annoying it and letting me watch it get more irritated. A second later, it did exactly what I'd been picturing. It took one last step on the rock, put a hand on the side sill like it had done it 100 times, and hauled itself up onto the walkway in one clean pull. Didn't even need the steps. No scrabbling, no slipping, just that upper body yanking up its own weight like it was nothing. With that move, it had closed the gap to about 10 feet. There were no more obstacles between us, other than the thin metal door and the small window. The second it had caught its footing again, it turned its face away from the beam, keeping the side of its head toward me, and started moving along the walkway toward the front of the locomotive. One of its hands was gripping the rail, just like a man, while the other was occupied shielding its eyes from the light. It didn't rush. I took slow, careful steps, back feet feeling for each tread like it had all the time in the world. I hit its face with the light as best I could, but the damn thing just kept coming. Every few steps, it'd angle its head just enough to keep the worst of the glare off its eyes, like a person turning away from the sun but refusing to change direction. Seeing it up on my level like that, with only a few feet between us, did something to my nerves that the view from the ground hadn't. It stopped feeling like I was watching something weird by the tracks and started feeling like I was pinned in a box with a big predator, seemingly committed to tearing me apart. Every line of it told me this thing was a killer. Legs, arms, claws, the way it moved its head. Nothing nervous or spooked, just steady and methodical. I remember backing off the window without meaning to, my hand locking around the flashlight until my knuckles hurt, breath going short, doing ugly math on how many seconds I had if it started throwing itself against the door. And then it closed the gap. One moment it was still out on the walkway, keeping its head turned from the beam, and the next it was right there, pressed up near the side window like it had crossed those last few feet on a decision I didn't get a vote on. It stopped and looked straight in at me through the glass. Not glancing, not checking, but staring, eyes level with mine, face close enough that I could see the wet shine of its nose and the tight pull of muscle along its massive jaws. My mind went blank. I had no idea what to do. All I felt was raw, stupid panic. The first thought I had wasn't brave or smart. What if I just find a place to hide? Like if it couldn't see me, maybe it would lose interest and drop back down to the ground, and I could pretend this never happened. So I moved fast. I yanked myself away from the window and half ran to the other side of the cab, keeping low, flashlight clutched in my fist. I hunkered down by the opposite wall, shoulders tight, trying to make myself small in a place you can't really be small. For a few moments, nothing happened. The engine idled. I held my breath and listened so hard my ears rang. Then the window burst. It wasn't a slow crack. It was a sharp, violent pop and a showering rattle, like someone had taken a hammer to it. I flinched hard enough to bang my elbow on the wall. Right after that came the sounds that made my skin crawl. Wet sniffing at the broken frame, short and hungry, and a low, steady growl that never rose into a full snarl, like it didn't need to. For a second, I still had a thread of hope. The window opening is too small. Even with the glass gone, something built like that isn't squeezing itself through a side cab window. I told myself it was frustrated. I told myself it might back off. That hope lasted until I heard claws working the metal door. Not scraping at random, working it. Nails ticking along the seam, dragging across the latch area, testing for weaknesses. And then came a massive impact that kicked through the cab like a fist through a drum. The whole door shuddered in its frame. The cab rocked, and I felt it in my teeth. Whatever hesitation I'd had about escalating vanished. If I didn't come up with something right now, it was going to get in. My first instinct was to get out of there. I looked across the cab at the other side window and thought about dropping down onto the ballast and running into the dark. But all I saw in my head was swamp and brush and those dead, black trees, and me trying to splash my way through it with no weapon, no way to call for help, and nowhere to go. Out there, I'd be slow and defenseless. Whatever was on that walkway would be on me in no time. I spun back, searching the cab for anything that wasn't just a flashlight and a prayer, and that's when my eyes landed on the fire extinguisher. Red cylinder mounted where it always is, something you don't think about unless you've got smoke in the cab. I lunged for it, ripped it free, yanked the pin so hard it bit into my palm, and went back to the broken window. I didn't aim like a firefighter. I just jammed the nozzle toward the opening and squeezed the handle. A white cloud exploded out and blasted straight into its face. The effect was immediate. The growls cut off into a harsh, choking sound, and it snapped its head away. It backed off a step on the walkway, both hands coming up, claws spread, scraping at its muzzle, and eyes like the powder was burning. I kept spraying, sweeping the stream left and right through the broken frame, filling the space between the window and the rail with that thick chemical fog until I could barely see it. It hated it, but it didn't leave. It retreated just far enough to breathe, pawing and wiping at its face, shaking its head like a dog that's gotten dust in its nose. I didn't stop. I held that handle down until my forearm started to shake, desperate to keep it irritated and blinded and off the door. Then the extinguisher sputtered. The spray weakened, coughed, and died. The cab filled with that bitter, chalky smell, and for one awful second, there was just silence and my own ragged breathing. Before I even put the extinguisher down, I saw it come forward again, faster now, more eager to get me. It leaned into the broken window, and I realized what it was doing at the last second. If it couldn't get in, it could still reach in. Its arms were more than long enough for that. It tried to wedge itself into the opening, pushing its muzzle against the jagged frame, angling one shoulder like it meant to hook an arm through and grab whatever it could. That gave me a split-second opening. I swung the empty extinguisher like a club and caught it in the face. If the cylinder had still been full, maybe it would have meant something. Empty, it was mostly just a hard thump. It jerked its head back, more annoyed than hurt. I tried to bring the extinguisher around again, and that was my mistake. A hand shot toward me and clamped onto the cylinder. Claws raked the metal, inches from my fingers. For a heartbeat, we were both holding it, me inside the cab, it outside on the walkway, and I felt the strength in that grip like a machine closing. It yanked. The extinguisher ripped out of my hands and disappeared through the window so fast it nearly took me with it. I stumbled forward and caught myself on the console, and when I looked back, I saw the claws had come close enough that one more inch would have hooked my sleeve. I was out of ideas and out of tools, and it was still there. I don't know why it took me that long to think of the horn. Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was because I'd already burned through every normal idea a working man reaches for. Light, hiding, makeshift weapons, like any of that mattered. I just watched it yank the extinguisher out through the window like it was nothing, and I was standing there empty-handed with the door shuddering under its assault. Then my eyes flicked up, almost by accident, to the horn handle. It was right there. The one thing on that whole locomotive that isn't meant to be polite. The one thing designed to make a mile of countryside flinch, and it hit me all at once, hard and clean. I couldn't outmuscle it, and I couldn't outrun it, but maybe I could hurt it without ever opening the door. I thought about my own dog at home, how she flinches every time a train goes over the nearby crossing, which is about 100 yards from the house. She'll be lying outside half asleep, and if the horn sounds for more than half a second, she's up with her ears pinned back, looking for a place to tuck herself. So if this thing hears anything as a dog does, and everything about it said it does, then a full train horn at arm's length wasn't a warning. It was a weapon. The thought was so sudden it felt like somebody else put it in my head, like a trap door opening under panic. I retreated as far away from the door as I could while keeping the horn still within reach. Then my right hand went straight for the handle. I didn't tap it or give it a little warning blast. I grabbed it and lay on it with everything I had. Inside the cab, the sound hits you in the chest. Outside, at that range, I can only imagine what it felt like. The horn came in full and hard, one long, steady blast that rolled out over the swamp and bounced back off the trees. The whole cab vibrated. I could feel it buzzing in my teeth. I kept my eyes on the broken rear window while I held it down. On the walkway, right behind the door, the Dogman looked like it was losing a fight with the air itself. It spun in a tight, frantic half-circle, shoulders hunched up to its ears, both hands clamped hard against the sides of its head, like it was trying to crush the sound out of its skull. The muscles along its neck and jaw jumped and twitched with each pulse of the horn, and it kept opening its mouth wide like it was roaring back at me. But all I could see was the strain in its throat and the way spit flicked from its lips. I kept that handle pulled. 20 seconds. 30. It wasn't just loud. It was pain. With that window blown out, there was nothing to muffle it on my side. The horn was screaming straight through the opening and into the cab. My own ears started to hurt badly, a sharp, stabbing ache that made my eyes water. I turned my head sideways and clamped my free hand over one ear, trying to protect it, but the sound still got in through my jaw and my teeth and the bones of my skull. My throat tightened up like I was swallowing against a vacuum. The creature tried to face the cab twice, like some part of it still wanted to commit. But the instant it turned toward the engine, it recoiled, head snapping away, whole body jerking sideways as if the horn had slammed it in the face. One clawed hand let go of its head, long enough to grab the handrail for balance, fingers white-knuckled around the steel. Then it lost its nerve and clamped both hands back over its ears again. It staggered backwards a few steps, paws scraping on the tread, and for a second, it looked genuinely panicked. It tried to back away along the walkway, still clamping its head with both hands, shoulders hunched like it was trying to fold in on itself, but it was moving blind. Head turned away, ears pinned, balance gone. One foot hit the edge wrong, and then it stumbled. The next second, it was off the walkway entirely. It slammed hard into the side of the railbed, shoulder first. It hit the ballast, bounced, and rolled down the embankment in a loose, uncontrolled tumble, still clutching its head with both hands like it was afraid to let go. Dirt and rock kicked up under it as it slid, legs tangling and then catching, until it finally caught itself at the bottom. It didn't stay down. It scrambled up on all fours and lurched for the culvert, back arched, nails tearing through grass and wet dirt, moving like it was trying to outrun the sound that was still ripping through its skull. It dove into that concrete hole like it was getting out of a fire. I held the horn a few seconds longer just to make sure, then finally let the handle go and sat there in the sudden relative quiet, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. For a little while, I just stared at the side window and the culvert mouth beyond, waiting to see if it would come back out. It didn't. The only things moving were the exhaust haze drifting along the top of the engine and the violent tremor in my own hands. I glanced up at the signal, still red. I caught myself checking it again and again, like staring at it hard enough might make it change. Anything to get me away from that damn culvert. And I know what you're thinking right here. Why didn't I just hit the gas and roll through the red signal? Because I couldn't. Not on a PTC main. If I so much as tried to creep past a red signal, positive train control would lock the train down immediately, and I'd be sitting there dead in the water with a train that wouldn't move until the whole mess got reset and explained. I'd be stranded out there in the dark, right next to that thing. Only then it'd be hours, not minutes. And if I survived long enough for a supervisor to show up, I'd be fired. No question. A few minutes doesn't sound like much when you say it out loud. Sitting there with that hole in the ground right beneath the engine and knowing what had just gone into it, it felt longer, but it was bearable. I knew how to hurt it, and nothing stopped me from hitting the horn again if necessary. But that didn't happen. Nothing else came out. Whatever I'd driven back down there was either smart enough or hurt enough to stay put while the echo burned out of its skull. When the signal finally flipped, I don't think I've ever been so happy in my life. I eased the throttle back up, brought the brakes off, and felt that long drag of weight start to move behind me. Even after the locomotive started to roll, I kept one eye on the culvert in the mirror until it slid out of sight. Nothing showed itself. The engine picked up its usual rhythm. The rail joint noise came back under my feet, and on paper, it was just another routine departure from a stop signal. It didn't feel routine. The rest of that run, I kept catching myself checking the mirrors and watching the tree line like I was expecting something to be pacing me out there in the dark. By the time I tied up and drove home, my head was pounding, and I'd almost talked myself into calling it stress, eyes playing tricks, maybe a bear caught in a bad angle of light. Almost. I didn't sleep right away. Instead, I sat down with a cup of coffee and my phone and did what everybody does when they see something they can't explain. I started typing things into a search bar. I didn't even use the word at first. I tried werewolf, Michigan, wolf walking on two legs, Dogman, stupid stuff like that. It didn't take long before the same phrase kept popping up in stories and old articles. Michigan Dogman. I'd heard it before, always as a joke. Campfire talk, radio shows, that song people play sometimes when they want to make fun of it. I started reading anyway. Sightings going back decades, different counties, most of them a lot farther south than where I'd been that night. Hunters, drivers, people walking dogs out on back roads. Some of the details lined up too close for comfort. The height, the way it moved, the hands. Nothing recent in the area I had been running through, but enough overall to make me feel less crazy. That was one rabbit hole. The other one was train horns. I looked up the decibel levels, how they're measured at 100 feet, and what that means up close. Everything I found said the same thing I already knew in my gut from being around them this long. They're loud enough to hurt you if you're dumb enough to stand too close for too long. Then I started finding articles and studies about what that kind of sound does to the ears, human and animal. Hair cells in the inner ear getting cooked, causing temporary and permanent damage, pain long before you ever go deaf. Add in the part about canines having more sensitive hearing than we do, and it didn't take a genius to connect the dots. Whatever was living in that culvert had walked up to my train like it owned the place, and the only reason it went back down there was because I put something in its world it didn't have an answer for.